The sky was gray, the kind of gray that presses down on you, heavy and silent. I remember the smell of smoke first, burning plastic, acrid and strange. Then I saw it. Flames curled around the twisted metal frame, blackened rubber melting in angry blobs beside dry kindling and snapped branches. My heart dropped before I even realized what I was looking at. The fire crackled in the center of the community park, right under the HOA pavilion. And there she was, Cynthia Rowe, the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood, standing proud, poker in hand, stoking the flames like she was barbecuing on a summer afternoon. Except this wasn't meat. It was my daughter's wheelchair. And my daughter? She was on the ground, face scraped, knees bleeding, breath hitching in panic as she tried to drag herself across the frozen grass with bare hands. No jacket, no gloves, just pajamas and confusion in her trembling voice. "Dad, my chair!" She took my chair, I sprinted, but no one else moved. A couple, on a morning walk, passed by without a second glance. One man watched from his porch, coffee in hand, eyes fixed but unmoved. No one said a word. And Karen, Cynthia, rather, didn't even look guilty. In fact, she saw me smirked and said with a sneer, "Unattended property is considered abandoned. Per HOA Regulation 6B. You should have read the handbook. Regulation 6B? My daughter's mobility, her independence, her dignity. Burning because a rulebook said something about unattended objects on common grounds? I lifted her from the ground. Her hands were blue, her face streaked with tears, but she wasn't crying. No, not my little warrior. She just stared at the flames like they were swallowing more than a chair, like they were taking something from her that none of us would ever be able to give back. I held her close, shaking with rage, but also fear. Fear of what this place had become. Fear that I had brought my family into a community that smiled in the daylight, but turned blind at injustice. The wheelchair was almost gone now, just twisted metal and char. I turned back to Cynthia, wanted to scream, to curse, to demand answers. But she simply turned her back, tossed another log on the fire, and walked away, like she hadn't just burned the legs off my daughter's life. That was the day I realized something darker than smoke hung over our neighborhood. And it had a name, Homeowners Association. But more than that, it had a face, and we were going to expose it, even if it meant taking on every smiling mask in that quiet, brutal street. 2 years before the fire, we moved into Roseville Meadows, a neatly trimmed suburban enclave nestled just 20 minutes outside the city. It looked like something from a home magazine. Identical houses in earth tones, picket fences that felt more decorative than defensive, and driveways lined with potted plants and seasonal flags. The kind of place people dream of when they talk about settling down. We were those people. I had just accepted a new job that came with enough stability to finally consider buying a home. My wife, Claire, was pregnant with our second child, and our oldest, our light, our fighter, was 7-year-old Ellie. Ellie had cerebral palsy. She had never walked on her own, and her wheelchair wasn't just a medical device, it was her legs, her playground, her wings. She zipped through parks, raced me in grocery store aisles, and painted the sidewalks with chalk from her lap tray. That chair was freedom. We picked Roseville Meadows, not just for the school ratings or the fence backyards, but because the listing said it was ADA accessible and family-friendly. The homes had ramps. The sidewalks were wide. We thought we'd finally found a place where Ellie could grow without bumping into the world's limitations at every corner. For the first 6 months, it was everything we hoped. Neighbors waved. A couple across the street brought cookies when they saw the moving truck. There was a neighborhood newsletter and monthly potlucks under the big pavilion in the park. Ellie made friends with a few kids at the elementary school down the road, and we even started planning to convert the garage into an art space for her. That was before Cynthia Rowe knocked on our door. It was a Tuesday morning. I remember it because I was rushing out for a conference call, and Claire was trying to get Ellie into her jacket. Cynthia was standing there with a clipboard, dark red lipstick, and the kind of forced smile that made your stomach twist. "Good morning. I'm Cynthia Rowe, the HOA vice chair. Just making my rounds." She handed us a laminated flyer about spring cleanup regulations, yard length limits, trash can positioning, parking rules. Nothing major. But then she looked down at Ellie's wheelchair ramp. "That's a permanent structure, isn't it?" she asked, tapping her pen against the railing. Claire nodded, slowly. "It came with the house. It's fully up to code." Well, per HOA Regulation 12A, external structures may require approval by the board. You might want to fill out a retroactive variance form, just in case someone files a complaint. Just in case. That was Cynthia's style. Everything was wrapped in courtesy, but soaked in quiet threat. From there, the visits increased. One week it was a warning for clutter in our side yard, the clutter being Ellie's sidewalk chalk bucket. Another time, she left a citation taped to our front door because the wheelchair was parked too close to the walkway overnight. We didn't want to cause trouble. We attended HOA meetings, spoke politely, asked for clarification. But everything we said seemed to fall into a void of indifference, or worse, suspicion. Cynthia always referred to Ellie's chair as the device. Never her chair. Never her mobility. The chair started becoming a target. At first, we thought we were being paranoid. But then it was reported missing twice by neighbors who claimed it was left abandoned on community property. Once, Ellie had wheeled herself just past the edge of the sidewalk near the mailboxes and stopped to talk to a friend. Someone filed a photo and timestamp to the HOA board saying the wheelchair was blocking a shared path. We were called in for a violation review. That meeting was the first time I truly saw Cynthia's power. She sat at the head of the table like a judge, back straight, face blank, voice cold. When I explained that Ellie was 7 years old and had been sitting in the chair the entire time it was allegedly abandoned, she raised one penciled eyebrow. "We are not questioning the child," she said, "only the use of the device in communal spaces." I clenched my fists, but Claire grabbed my hand. We were guests in this neighborhood, even though we owned the house. "That's how Cynthia made you feel." Ellie asked me once, "Dad, why does that lady hate my wheels?" I told her she didn't, that it was just a misunderstanding. But I knew I was lying. The truth was, Cynthia didn't see Ellie as a child. She saw her as a disruption, a wrinkle in the fabric of her perfectly trimmed, HOA manicured world. The following weeks, more small things started happening. Ellie's chalk drawings were hosed off by unknown neighbors. Her access ramp had a strange screw loosened twice. Our trash can was moved to the wrong side of the curb, and we got fined. We began keeping cameras up. We backed up every notice and email. We didn't want to pick a fight, but we knew one was coming. And then winter came. December. The incident happened 3 days before Christmas. We had decorated the house modestly, some string lights, a wreath, a handmade display Ellie had crafted out of old boxes and paper snowflakes. Cynthia sent a notice claiming our decorations exceeded HOA-approved dimensions. That was the final warning we received. 3 days later, while Claire was inside wrapping presents and I was on a grocery run, Cynthia made her move. She called it grounds maintenance. Ellie was playing outside on her own ramp, safe, like she always was, but when she stepped out of the chair to reach for a snowball mold she dropped, Cynthia acted. She took the chair, told one neighbor she was removing a hazard, told another she was disposing of unapproved objects, dragged it to the community fire pit, lit a match, and stood there with her clipboard as it burned. The morning after the fire, the ashes were still smoldering. All that remained of Ellie's wheelchair was a twisted, half-melted wheel hub and a scorched aluminum rod, barely recognizable if you hadn't spent years pushing it uphill through sand and over uneven sidewalks while your daughter giggled in it. Claire didn't speak. She just stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, rocking slightly as if trying to hold her bones together. Ellie was in her room, silent, not asleep, not crying, just silent. That terrified me the most. My daughter, the child who once narrated everything she saw out loud like she was documenting the world, had retreated into a bubble of blankness. I paced the living room, phone in hand, the HOA handbook open on the table, rereading Regulation 6B for the 5th time, Unattended objects may be removed by the board if deemed obstructive, abandoned, or hazardous to community flow. But my daughter wasn't an object. Her wheelchair wasn't abandoned. She was in it or just a few feet from it. When Cynthia dragged it away like it was a broken lawn chair, we filed a police report that morning. The officer, a man in his late 50s with a slow drawl and mirrored glasses, listened politely, scribbled into a notepad, then glanced at the singed frame I'd salvaged. No signs of forced entry. No physical harm. It's more of a civil matter, sir. You might have to take it up with the HOA directly. Claire's voice cracked for the first time. She burned our child's wheelchair in front of her. What more do you need? He lowered his voice. Look, I get it. It's disgusting. But unless you want to file a civil suit, there's not much I can do legally today. The HOA's rules are legally binding here. If they say it was obstructing, it was our ramp, I said through clenched teeth, and our chair. I'm just doing my job, sir. That phrase would come to define the next few weeks. We wrote formal complaints to the HOA. Cynthia herself signed the return notices, dismissing our claims with phrases like, action taken under administrative authority, violation of visual uniformity standards, temporary mobility aid left in community zone beyond acceptable duration. Temporary. Like Ellie's need for it was optional. Like her existence was a nuisance to the aesthetic, we requested an emergency board hearing. Denied. The next scheduled HOA meeting was in 4 weeks. Cynthia included a hand-signed note. If the chair was essential, perhaps you should consider ensuring your daughter remains supervised. This neighborhood is not responsible for parenting duties. That's when I realized it wasn't about the chair. It was about power. Control. Cynthia Rowe wasn't enforcing rules. She was enforcing dominance. Meanwhile, whispers started. The family 2 doors down, Mark and Janet, suddenly stopped waving. Their daughter, who used to play chalk games with Ellie, no longer came around. One morning, I overheard Janet talking to another woman in hushed tones near the mailbox. I heard they let her crawl around unattended. Poor thing. But it's not really our place. The narrative was shifting. Cynthia had a strong grip on the neighborhood, and somehow we were becoming the problem. Rumors spread that we were happy, that Ellie's injuries were exaggerated, that Claire had snapped and destroyed the chair herself out of some kind of mental breakdown. Absurd, but effective. We stopped receiving newsletters. Our HOA app login suddenly stopped working. I contacted the tech support email listed in the handbook and received a polite message back. Your account is currently under internal review for misuse of community forums. Misuse? We had posted one message asking if any neighbors had witnessed the chair being taken. That post was deleted within 2 hours. The silence from the neighborhood was deafening. Until, one night, we received an anonymous envelope on our doorstep. Inside was a USB drive. I plugged it into my laptop. A single video file. Grainy surveillance footage from someone's Ring camera. Timestamped 6:12 p.m., the day of the incident. It showed Cynthia walking briskly across the lawn. She paused at the foot of our ramp, looked around, and then, with absolutely no hesitation, pushed the wheelchair down the slope, steering it across the grass like a grocery cart. Ellie was in the corner of the frame, just off the path, her tiny hands reaching, mouth open. Cynthia didn't look at her. Not once. I showed the video to Claire. She cried for the first time since the fire. Then she wiped her face and said, "We're not letting this go." We uploaded the video to a cloud drive, saved copies everywhere, burned it to discs, sent it to a lawyer friend of mine from college. He called us within 24 hours. "This is criminal," he said, "but it's going to be hell proving intent. You're in a legally protected HOA. She's using policy as a shield. The only way you fight this is by exposing the culture." The culture. We began asking questions. Quietly, carefully. Claire started knocking on doors again, but this time not to confront, to listen. That's how we met Mrs. Delgado, an older widow on the far corner of the neighborhood. She invited Claire in, and once the door was shut, opened up like a dam. Cynthia had fined her over 20 times for unauthorized decor. Her offense? A ceramic angel on her front porch, a memorial for her late husband. Cynthia called it religious display bias, she said, eyes red. Said it promoted unapproved spiritual narratives. I took it down, but my heart never forgave her. Then there was Benji, a single dad raising twin boys. He was fined for placing a basketball hoop in their driveway. Then Fatima and Raymond, a Pakistani couple who moved in the year before. They received noise complaints every time they had family over for dinner, despite never exceeding quiet hours. Cynthia wasn't just targeting us. She was targeting anyone who didn't fit her picture-perfect, magazine cover vision of suburban life. And most people were just too scared to fight back. But we weren't, because our daughter was watching, and she deserved to see what standing up looked like, even if your legs didn't work. It was December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas, a Thursday, one of those rare mornings where the world feels still before the storm. Snow had started falling lightly, soft flakes drifting in the air like a lullaby. Claire was wrapping presents inside. I had stepped out to get groceries, thinking we'd finally have a peaceful holiday, even if the scars of the wheelchair theft still burned raw. Ellie had been in good spirits that morning. She wanted to decorate the front railing with paper snowflakes she'd made at school using just safety scissors and one working hand. I want people to know we're still here, she told Claire. It made her feel proud, visible. That chair was a temporary loaner from the hospital. Nothing like her original one. It was clunky, too wide, and difficult for her to maneuver. But she insisted. She wanted to do it herself. Claire helped her down the ramp and stepped inside. Just for a moment, to warm milk, she would later say. That's when Cynthia made her move. According to footage from a neighbor's security camera and later multiple statements, Cynthia had been waiting. She crossed from her property to ours with that familiar clipboard in hand, walked right up to Ellie, looked her in the eye, and said, "You're not supposed to leave things like this out. It's community space." Ellie, startled, stammered, I'm using it. I'm decorating." But Cynthia didn't respond. She circled the chair like a shark, inspecting it with exaggerated concern. She tapped the frame with her pen, then turned to a man walking his dog and shouted loud enough for everyone to hear, "Another abandoned mobility aid, unattended again." The man hesitated, then turned and walked away. Cynthia leaned in and calmly said, "You're on the ground, so I guess you don't need it right now." And then she gripped the handles and pushed. Ellie reached out, grabbing for the seat, but fell forward into the snow. The thick slush soaked her sleeves as she hit the ground hard. Her knees scraped the concrete, and she cried out, not for help, not even in fear. Just a small, panicked no that echoed like a whisper against the quiet of falling snow. Cynthia didn't stop. She wheeled the chair down the curb and across the street toward the community pavilion. It was set up for the holiday bonfire that evening, a tradition Cynthia proudly ran. The pit was already built, logs neatly stacked, kindling placed carefully underneath. Claire emerged from the house just as Cynthia was midway across the lawn. She saw Ellie on the ground. She ran to her daughter, screaming her name, arms flailing, heartbeat bursting. Ellie pointed with one shaking hand. "She's burning it. She's burning my chair." Claire turned toward the fire pit. Cynthia was already there, hoisting the chair up onto the logs. Several neighbors watched from porches. None intervened. Two others, HOA board members, stood nearby with folded arms and nervous eyes. One of them, James, we later learned, whispered something to Cynthia, who simply shook her head and said, "It's obstructive and unapproved." The board granted emergency clearance. "I'm protecting our visual standards." She struck the match. It sparked instantly, catching the dry wood underneath. The flames swallowed the cloth seat first, crackling black and curling back like a dying flower. The plastic wheels warped in seconds, the rubber smoking and hissing. One armrest collapsed inward as the fire licked its frame. By the time I returned from the store, I saw the smoke before I saw the crowd. Then I saw Claire, knees soaked, holding Ellie in her arms, rocking back and forth like she could somehow shield her from the sight. Then I saw it. The fire. The wheelchair. Cynthia, and something inside me broke. I parked on the lawn without thinking, ran toward the blaze, dropping the grocery bags in the street. I screamed her name. Cynthia, what are you doing? She turned slowly, as if I had interrupted a board meeting. You were warned. Multiple times. This item was removed under full authority of Section 9. That's my daughter's chair. She didn't blink. Claire rose from the snow, shaking with fury. She was in it 5 minutes ago. She's on the ground because of you. Cynthia raised her hands like a priest in confession. I followed every legal step. Perhaps if you supervised your child properly. I took one step closer, fists clenched. A neighbor stepped between us. Hey man, it's not worth it. Let's all calm down. Calm. I said, she just burned my daughter's only means of mobility. Cynthia stepped back slightly. You can report it. But I assure you, the board won't support personal retaliation. Claire snapped. She's 7 years old. She uses that chair to exist. And you burned it like it was trash? Cynthia turned her head, locking eyes with me one last time. Some things don't belong in public view, especially when they make others uncomfortable. That sentence would haunt me, not just for its cruelty, but because no one corrected her. Not one neighbor, not one witness, not even the board. Later that night, I sat with Ellie on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching cartoons without laughter. Her hands were bandaged. Her face was still. I asked, "Do you want me to tell you a story?" She shook her head. I don't feel like stories anymore. Claire sat beside her, tears streaking her cheeks. I couldn't sleep. I went outside after midnight, walked to the still-smoking fire pit, and stared at the blackened metal that had once carried my daughter through life like a chariot. I made a silent promise. We would not let this go. Not this time. Not ever. The next morning, everything was normal. That was the most gut-wrenching part. The sun came up. The neighborhood kids played in the park as if nothing had happened. Cynthia Rowe took her morning walk, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other, nodding politely to those she passed. The charred remains of Ellie's wheelchair had been cleared from the fire pit by sunrise. Not a trace left behind. The pit was swept clean, like it had never been there. Just a fresh circle of stones, ready for the next holiday gathering. Claire and I went to the HOA office that morning. It was closed. A handwritten sign on the door read, "Holiday hours in effect. Office will reopen January 4th. That was 13 days away. We filed another police report, this time attaching the neighbor's video footage as evidence. We brought printed images of the burned site, Ellie's scraped arms, and even a notarized letter from the hospital indicating the chair had been loaned under urgent need. The officer reviewed everything. This time, it was a different guy, young, probably just a few years out of academy training. He leaned back in his chair after watching the footage and muttered, "Jesus." We waited. Finally, he said, "This is outrageous. But legally, this falls into a gray area. The property belonged to your daughter, yes, but the HOA's governing rules are considered enforceable under your deed contract. If they claim this was a hazard, it could be interpreted as community jurisdiction. So that means anyone can steal and burn medical equipment now?" Claire snapped. "I'm not defending her," he said quickly. "I'm saying you're going to need to take this to civil court. And even then, it'll come down to interpretation of the HOA bylaws." Interpretation. That word made my blood boil. When Cynthia burns a child's wheelchair in broad daylight while she watches from the ground, it's interpretation. But if I had laid a single finger on her in response, that would have been assault. No interpretation needed. Claire and I met with our lawyer friend that afternoon. He reviewed the footage, the letters, and every violation notice we'd received since moving in. Then he looked up and said flatly, "She's been building a paper trail against you since month 1. Every letter, every warning, every so-called complaint, it was designed to justify something like this. She didn't act impulsively. She laid the groundwork for this moment. And the board?" He shrugged. Complicit, or too scared to intervene. Either way, they enabled her. We discussed suing. But lawsuits like this, especially against a well-funded HOA, are expensive. HOA boards are protected by legal shields unless criminal negligence can be proven. We would be going against a machine with deep pockets, neighborhood influence, and years of strategic documentation. And worse, they still had the upper hand. 3 days after the incident, we received a letter by certified mail. This notice is to inform you that your property is under review for multiple violations. These include, but are not limited to, public disturbance, improper parking on lawn, and damage to community morale. Damage to morale. They were turning us into the threat. The letter warned that additional violations could result in a lien against her home. Cynthia had burned Ellie's wheelchair, and now they were threatening to take our house. We tried speaking to other neighbors. Some were quietly supportive. Mrs. Delgado baked Ellie cookies and left them anonymously on the porch. Fatima and Raymond texted to say they were praying for us. But publicly, no one spoke. People kept their heads down. HOA intimidation was like a fog that blanketed the entire community. If you stepped out of line, you weren't just fined, you were frozen out. Socially, financially, reputationally. The neighborhood holiday newsletter came in the mail 2 days after Christmas. The front page featured a glowing thank you message from Cynthia Rowe. Thanks to our dedicated board and community volunteers, our annual bonfire was a success. We are proud to protect the peaceful and orderly environment of Roseville Meadows. There was no mention of Ellie, of us, of what had been lost. Just a reminder that Cynthia was winning. Ellie didn't speak for a full week after the fire. She refused to go outside, refused to sit in the temporary chair again. She just stayed on the couch, watching the snow fall, drawing silent pictures in her sketchbook, mostly of people standing alone in the cold. I caught one drawing late at night. It showed a tall woman with a clipboard standing in front of a burning object. Next to it, a small girl on the ground. No face, just a stick figure with outstretched arms. My heart broke in ways I didn't know it could. Claire and I stayed up that night making a choice. We couldn't undo what happened. We couldn't make the HOA care. We couldn't unburn the chair. But we could fight, not just for Ellie, but for every family who had been bullied, silenced, and threatened into submission. Cynthia thought her laws protected her. But there was one law stronger than hers. The truth. And we were ready to put it on record. We began the next morning with a notebook and a plan. Claire labeled the front. Operation Truth, Roseville Meadows. We weren't lawyers and we didn't have deep pockets. But we had the truth footage, and one thing Cynthia had always underestimated: our resolve. We started with evidence. We cataloged every HOA letter, citation, warning, and email we'd received since moving in. Each was scanned, time-stamped, and filed chronologically. We highlighted phrases like abandoned device, visual violation, and community standards, language used repeatedly to target Ellie's chair. Then we interviewed other residents. Quietly, we approached them not as accusers, but as listeners. Mrs. Delgado shared her experience again, this time on camera. She made me feel like a criminal for mourning my husband, she said, clutching the ceramic angel Cynthia forced her to remove. Her voice cracked. All I wanted was to remember him. Benji, the single dad, recorded an audio message about being fined over a child's toy hoop. She said it was an eyesore, said it reduced the value of the neighborhood. My kids cried when I took it down. Fatima and Raymond wrote a letter of support, sharing how they'd received warnings for unauthorized ethnic gatherings, aka family dinners. Cynthia had called their gatherings potential noise disruptions, even though they ended before quiet hours. It wasn't just us. Cynthia had a pattern. We created a shared Google Drive, compiling all evidence into labeled folders. Claire made charts showing violation frequency by household. The trend was obvious. Minorities, single parents, elderly widows, anyone she perceived as other was targeted. Next came outreach. I contacted a local journalist, a woman named Tanya Brooks, who specialized in community justice stories. I sent her the ring footage, a summary of what had happened to Ellie, and a few sample violations. I didn't expect a response. She called the next morning. I've covered some monsters before, but this? A child's wheelchair? And they threatened to lien your house. Yes, I said, and we're not the only ones. She asked for everything. We gave her the drive. In the meantime, we printed flyers with one bold question: is your HOA protecting you or controlling you? We included a QR code that linked to a hidden web page Claire made, a collection of stories, videos, and documents. We distributed them quietly. No mailbox stuffing, just word of mouth. The flyers spread faster than we expected. A neighbor we'd never spoken to, Marcus, from the next cul-de-sac, knocked on our door. I read what happened. I've had issues too. Let me know how I can help. Others followed. The silence Cynthia depended on began to crack. Then Tanya's article dropped. HOA, from hell. When a child's wheelchair becomes visual pollution, the headline went viral within 24 hours. News outlets picked it up. Online forums exploded. People from across the country commented, outraged. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Ellie and hashtag HOA abuse started trending locally. Cynthia issued a formal response on the HOA website. The situation has been misrepresented by individuals with an agenda. The HOA board has acted within legal bounds to ensure order and safety. We regret any perceived offense. But the damage was done. A petition began circulating to remove her from the HOA board. Over 60% of residents signed within 72 hours. People who had never spoken out before were now showing up at meetings, demanding transparency. The January HOA meeting, previously quiet, half-attended affairs, was packed. Cynthia walked in wearing her signature pencil skirt and tight bun, clipboard in hand. But she wasn't in control anymore. One by one, residents stood up. They read letters, played audio recordings, shared stories. And then Claire stood up. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply placed Ellie's burnt wheelchair frame on the table in front of the board, blackened, twisted, silent. "This is what your silence allowed," she said. Cynthia didn't speak for the rest of the meeting. 3 days later, she resigned. We thought Cynthia stepping down would be the end of it. But what came next, no one saw coming. A few weeks after her resignation, Claire received a call from Tanya, the journalist who broke our story. Her voice sounded different this time, sharper, excited but careful. "You might want to sit down," she said. "This is bigger than HOA violations." She had been digging deeper into HOA public records, following a trail of strange financial footnotes. Over the last 3 years, Roseville Meadows' annual budgets had quietly redirected increasing amounts into something called Neighborhood Preservation Services, a shell contractor allegedly for lawn upkeep and visual code enforcement. Except the company didn't exist. No phone number, no real address, just APO box and one listed administrator, Cynthia Rowe. She had been funneling HOA funds, our funds, into a fake business she controlled, paying herself for maintenance and removal of hazards, including the destruction of Ellie's wheelchair, which she claimed cost $4.75 in environmental cleanup. She was embezzling the entire time. Tanya's follow-up article hit like a sledgehammer. From power to profit. How an HOA leader turned a neighborhood into her business. This time, it wasn't just neighbors who reacted. The county attorney's office opened a formal investigation. Cynthia's bank accounts were frozen. Her assets were audited. She was charged with multiple counts of fraud, misappropriation of funds, and destruction of medical property. We watched from our porch as a police cruiser pulled up to her house, lights off but serious. Cynthia walked out in a gray coat, hands shaking, not from cold, but fear. No clipboard this time. The same neighbors who once avoided us now stood beside us. Mrs. Delgado wept. Benji recorded from his phone. Marcus clapped. As they took Cynthia into custody, Ellie whispered from her chair, the new one, the custom-built beauty gifted by a local nonprofit that read her story, "Daddy, I think she's in timeout." I laughed for the first time in weeks. But the real twist came days later. The interim HOA chair, appointed after Cynthia's resignation, held a special meeting. He stood at the front, papers in hand, voice steady. We reviewed every violation filed by Ms. Rowe over the past 3 years. A large percentage were not only baseless but fabricated. Effective immediately, those citations are voided. Any resulting fines will be refunded. And then, looking directly at us, to the Reynolds family, we owe you an apology and a thank you for standing up when the rest of us were afraid. Applause filled the room. Ellie beamed. Claire squeezed my hand. For the first time since we'd moved to Roseville Meadows, it finally felt like home. Not because it was perfect, but because we burned something else down in that fire, fear. And in its ashes, something better began to grow. Spring arrived slowly, like a long exhale after holding your breath all winter. The snow melted, revealing soft patches of green across the yards of Roseville Meadows. Ellie's new wheelchair glided over the sidewalks like a dream, smooth, sturdy, with vibrant purple accents she picked herself. She called it Phoenix because, she said, it rose from fire. She was right. The fire that had once taken so much from us had, somehow, given us something else in return, a voice, a strength we didn't know we had, and a community that was finally waking up. Claire and I still carried the weight of those weeks. The silence, the injustice, the helplessness. But now it was tempered by something bigger, pride. Ellie started drawing again. Her sketchbook no longer featured stick figures in the cold. Instead, there were suns, birds, and bold captions in her shaky but determined handwriting. One page stood out to me. It showed our house, our family, and beneath it in crayon, they tried to take my chair, but they couldn't take my family. We planted a cherry blossom tree near the corner of our yard that spring. Neighbors helped. Marcus brought the soil. Fatima brought snacks. Mrs. Delgado, tears in her eyes, brought a small angel statue and placed it at the base. For strength, she said, we named the tree Hope. The new HOA board revised the bylaws. They added protections for disabled residents, stricter oversight of board spending, and, most importantly, a grievance process that couldn't be ignored. At the first meeting under the new leadership, the chairperson invited Claire to speak. She didn't prepare a speech. She didn't need one. She stood at the podium, held up a photo of Ellie beside the burned wheelchair, and simply said, we all watched this happen, not just to our daughter, but to our conscience. Let's promise we'll never let silence protect cruelty again. There was no applause, only quiet nods, the kind that meant something had shifted permanently. We still live in Roseville Meadows, not because we have to, but because it's ours now. We earned it, reshaped it, reclaimed it. And every time Ellie wheels down the sidewalk, head high, hair blowing in the wind, neighbors wave, not out of habit, but out of respect. Sometimes I catch Cynthia's old house in my peripheral vision. Empty now, for sale, overgrown. A monument to what happens when power forgets empathy, and what happens when a little girl reminds the world how to stand tall without ever standing up. If this story moved you, if it made you feel angry, heartbroken, or inspired, then don't let it end here. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because too many families are still trapped in silence, bullied by the very systems meant to protect them. Let this be a reminder. Standing up for what's right doesn't always take strength. Sometimes it just takes refusing to stay down. Subscribe to our channel, HOA Denied Access, where we expose real stories of injustice, courage, and resilience, because every voice deserves to be heard, and every wrong deserves a reckoning. Together, let's make sure no one has to fight alone again. Your share could be the reason someone finds the strength to speak up.